this. I am in Berlin. I'm located in Berlin, but I am just, as I explained to Teresa, the walking calendar for the IPA, the International People's Assembly, which are mainly Global South organizations. And I discussed with the groups that we are working with on the African continent that as soon as we have topics and agenda that what we want to cover in the webinar, I will disseminate and share with them, and we will decide who of our people would be a good person to participate, either in person or online. I'm happy to be here and I'm looking forward to the conversation. Though, George, there are no points in the chat. I'm sorry. I don't know if anyone else sees your...
No, I haven't put it there yet.
Okay, sorry. Then I'll shut up.
Yeah.
Thank you.
If you put something in the chat and people come after, they won't see it. I'm going to wait till we're going to discuss the different pieces and then I'll put it in the chat. So next is, I think, Edward or Edmund. I can't remember. I just know you're from Ghana. And after Edward, or what your name is correctly, then we've got Sean. So go ahead, Ghana brother. You gotta unmute yourself. Oh, there you go.
Sorry. Hello, my name is Ernest from Ghana, West Africa, and my organization is the Global Peace Association of Ghana.
Great. You're glad you're here. Sean, and then Edwick.
Yes, my name is Sean Connor from the International Peace Bureau. Our headquarters office, excuse me, is in Berlin. We have a global network, and Ernest, who's here in the call today, is the coordinator of our African network. So I'm very glad he could join.
Great.
And I think he'll explain a little bit more about the network as we get into things.
Excellent. Edwick and then Teresa. Unmute Edwick. Thank you.
Yeah. Thank you. My phone is just frozen. Hello.
Hello, you look great.
Okay, thank you so much. My name is Edric Matsumure. I'm from Zimbabwe, and the organization it's Women's International League for Peace and Freedom, of which I'm also the alternate African regional representative for the Will of African region. Thank you. Nice seeing you all, and I'm looking forward to the engagement that we're going to have here.
Great. Teresa and then Naka.
Thank you, George. I'm Teresa Alameen. I'm in the U.S. section of the Women's International League for Peace and Freedom in Columbus, Georgia, in the Deep South with the Fannie Lou Hamer branch. My other organization, I'm the founder and board chair of the Southern Anti-Racism Network, which is committed to ending capitalism, imperialism, patriarchy, and white supremacy, also based in the U.S. South, in North Carolina, South Carolina, Georgia, Alabama. Thank you.
Hello?
Yanaka?
Yes, yes. Good morning here. Good afternoon on your side. I am Nyaka Laboke. I am an assistant professor at Lincoln University. I teach Pan-African Studies and History. And then I'm also a founding member of the Convention for Pan-Africanism and Progress, CPP. And I give interviews and conferences, and I'm also a political analyst. I just came from Togo. The government of Togo wants to launch the ninth Pan-African Congress. So I was there as one of the guest speakers. And then, so yes, I'm here in this group, thanks to Teresa and then George. They included me on a panel, in a panel on AFRICOM maybe months ago, and then they invited me, so I'm here this morning.
So glad to have you here, and you were great in that webinar, AFRICOM Out of Africa, a couple of years ago. I'm George Friday. I'm a member of WILF US section. I'm on the board as the program chair. I'm also a lifetime member of the Southern Anti-Racism Network, and I'm in the Southern Piedmont branch I'm in Gastonia, North Carolina, but there's lots of, mostly Charlotte is the big city that we cover. So here you have the items that we need to cover today. The theme and our key topics, our speakers, the order of those topics, the process for the webinar, and the action steps that we're going to recommend. Also, make sure we talk about our next meeting or a speakers meeting before we close. Anything else that y'all feel like we need to cover that's not listed there?
George, I think that the 2 days that the webinars are happening, the international webinars, which are mostly going to be hybrids, there will be people on the ground in Russia, and hopefully there will be Africa representation on the ground in Brussels. But we need to talk about what proposal we would make for when we would do the webinar, because we have a choice between Friday and Saturday. And I had asked for us to look towards Friday because there's quite a bit planned for Saturday already. So if we could try to think in terms of a time slot for Friday, July 7th. So if we could discuss that possibility, since several folks that have been asked to speak, Edwick, Yanaka, are here, and perhaps Ernest would be a speaker, and just deciding the speakers and the possibility, but also the date. So this is a really good list, George. Thank you.
Sure. And we can cover that under the process. That'll be what date, how are we going to get the information out, all of those details. But thanks, that's good. We know that overall this is about no to NATO, but if we can decide on the key topics, Teresa, I know you have some ideas there. Can you share those with us and other folks in terms of the theme of the Africa Working Group webinar and any key topics we want to make sure are included? Thank you.
Well, this is the UN Decade for People of African Descent, which began on January 1 of 2015, and it ends December 31st of 2024. And I thought it important to lift up the fact that this is a UN decade, and all over the world, people are demanding reparations for the colonial and imperialist attacks on Africa and African peoples worldwide. And so the NATO countries particularly are guilty of that, having been colonial powers throughout Africa, and the US certainly being the greatest purveyor of slavery, bringing so many Africans to the United States to be enslaved. So I think it's a way for us to lift up the call from the UN decade, which is a call for recognition, development, and justice. And the Women's International League for Peace and Freedom passed a resolution at its triennial Congress in July of 2022, which calls on all of us in WILF worldwide in the 52 sections around the world, with approximately 20 sections in Africa, and to make sure that we do the work for the last years of the decade, which are this year and next year, 2024. So that's kind of one of the things I hope we could lift up in our way of saying no to NATO, based on the NATO countries, the dominant NATO countries, having been colonial powers over African people. So that's just one thing I thought that perhaps Edwick could touch on. And if Sylvie, who is the international president of WILF based in Cameroon, and based on what's happening in Cameroon, in Sudan, and in the Central African Republic, recently, I think there's lots to be said. And I know that Inaka can also speak to some of the turmoil on the continent that has involvement from some of the imperialist powers. So that was the thing that I had proposed in keeping with WILF's declaration on the UN decade. Thank you.
That sounds great. Thank you. And now I'm going to put some of y'all on the spot. I couldn't do this if I were y'all, but given what Teresa shared, I want to ask Edwick and Eugene and then Naka to share, based on what you heard and what you know and what you do regularly when you speak, what aspect of the theme Teresa talked about, or what additional topic might you bring under that umbrella theme when you speak on July 7th. So I'm gonna start with Edwick, and then we'll go to Eugene. I hope I'm saying it correctly. And then Naka.
Is it Eugene or Ernest from Ghana?
Remember. It may be Ernest. I just remembered E sound.
Well, he needs to unmute himself and correct it so we know his name.
Eugene or Ernest?
From Ghana?
Yes, ma'am.
Yeah, I see him, but he's not unmuting.
Correct me, please, sir.
Yes, the name is Ernest from Ghana.
Oh, I apologize for getting it wrong. So you'll go after Edwick, and we'll hear your take on things and your how you'll zero in on the topic, and then last we'll hear from Naka. So Edwick, putting you on the spot first, and 2 or 3 minutes or more if you need, not more than 5, to give us an idea of what you'll cover, or what you imagine you might be able to cover or talk about, given the topics of UN decade for people of African descent and ending NATO on the continent. You're muted, Edwick. Well, dang.
Well,
We'll come back to her. Let's go to Eugene. Eugene?
Well, George, let me just say this while Edwick is trying to unmute. Edwick was suggested by Nancy Price, who is part of Earth and Democracy, a issue committee inside of the U.S. section of WILF. And I think she was suggested because of her involvement with environmental justice issues. And so when she gets to unmute herself, I think that was the idea in terms of what she would bring to the table on July 7th when she speaks. So I just wanted to let people know that, since Edwick seems to be having a problem unmuting, or maybe she stepped away from the meeting. So I guess Ernest can go next now.
Thanks so much. It looks like we've lost Ernest. Hopefully he can get back soon. Edwick, are you able to unmute yet? I guess not. So Naka, you speak about the continent overall, but what do you think you would contribute or can bring, given the theme and any topics you can cover?
Yeah, so I just wanted to know, as you maybe I may ask you and Teresa if you think that because you saw my presentation last time, but you think that I can do the same presentation, or I can talk about the general state of Africa, and then that will include the military dimension or the African issue or the French military bases issue. So, so if you think that it is okay if I can do that, because what is happening in Africa, that's why I appreciate when I have the opportunity to speak. There are many things that are happening, positive things, but people do not always know. For instance, the event I attended on May 22nd, it's a big issue. Togo is not a traditional Pan-African nation, but now they took the lead, and then they want to organize a Pan-African Congress. And so the South African Minister of Foreign Affairs, a powerful woman, Dr. Naledi Pandor, was there. So these are things, and then I also heard, I think this is Teresa will love to hear that. I also heard when I was in Togo that Ghana is going to host a conference on reparation, like a project which was endorsed by the African Union. That's something that I was not aware of. So I can talk about all the things like the reawakening of the African masses, and then how this is also impacting the struggle against the military bases in Africa. So, Teresa, tell me, and George, what do you think?
I think that sounds wonderful. And it's too bad that we lost Ernest. But perhaps Sean and Francisca can say, oh, well, it looks like Ernest is back. So let's make sure Ernest knows about Ghana hosting the reparations conference. And if he could speak to that, it would be great. It looks like he's come in sideways from my screen. Is he looking that way to you, George?
Yes. So if you're able to rotate your image, there you go.
Oh, yeah.
That's it.
And if he can unmute himself, I'm not sure if he's being proposed as a speaker, but given his position in the international, is it the International People's Bureau or
Peace.
International Peace Bureau?
Peace, International Peace Bureau.
Well, maybe he can say if he's willing to be a speaker.
Let's hope
and
so.
what he would speak about.
Okay, one last chance right now. Edwick, can you unmute? We'll come to you after we hear from Ernest, and hope you can. Okay, Ernest, your thoughts.
Yes, thank you so much for giving me the opportunity to speak. First of all, I apologize for the fluctuation of the network. And actually, it was really breaking, so I didn't really get the concept so well. But however, I am a board member of the International Peace Bureau and also coordinator of the African network of the IPB in Africa. And with the ongoings in Africa currently, then I think it would be appropriate for me to talk on probably the impact of the US and NATO allies military on Africa. So if that is okay, then I can touch on that and be a speaker.
I think that would be more than okay. And Naka just talked about a conference in Ghana focusing on reparations. Have you heard about that?
No, I haven't heard about that, but I can check on that to get information about it. If there is a link about that, they can share it with me, then I will go through it and give information about it.
Yes, Naka, if you have information you can share either by the link or by replying to the email that I've sent and replying to all, that would be great. And we'll get that to Eugene. Edwick, are you with us?
George, Ernest from Ghana, do you have his email? Because I think we've been emailing Francisca and maybe Sean, but I'm not sure if we had Ernest's email.
Yeah, you'll need to put your email in the chat, Ernest, so that we can contact you and can make sure everyone who's connected will be a speaker. All righty. Edward,
And
well,
could we hear from Sean and Francisca? I know that I was kind of saying to Francisca that we envision the panel as all people of African descent, but I realize they have an international organization with probably some positions on the NATO as it relates to Africa. Because I don't want us to lose sight, George, of the primary theme overall for being in Brussels is to say no to NATO at the headquarters of NATO. So perhaps Francisca and Sean can share some ideas and suggestions.
sounds good. So Francisca, you can go, and then Sean, and we're on, what are the pieces we want to cover during this time. So what do you have? Any thoughts?
Thank you. First, I want to say that I was talking to comrades from Morocco and Tunisia, and I was wondering, so this is a question, whether in the African panel we want to include, considering that we have also Pan-Africanists here, also people from Northern Africa. That would be my first question, and then I would pursue this route, because we work with people in Ghana as well. But obviously, Ghana we have covered, so I'm not going to explore that further. But so my first question concerns Northern Africa. My second question that I have is whether there's any orientation from the main group, from the women who are organizing this, as to whether the speakers should be women or men. I'm sorry, I was specifically looking for women speakers, and so this is another question that I have. And then question number 3 that I have is concerning how is our ambition for bringing people to Brussels. I understand that the events are initially planned as hybrid events, so that some people would be in Brussels, and some people obviously travel. It's a far travel, and there's also resource concerns, etc. What is our ambition for that? And other than that, I agree with the topics, and I think what Naka and Ernest have proposed is amazing, and AFRICOM would have been a topic for our Southern region African people as well. So I think that's fantastic.
Great.
As far as the
so I can answer those backwards, 3 and then 2, and Teresa's
Oh, wonderful. Thank you. Thank you, George.
Okay, so the third one, what was the third one again?
The third one was about how many people,
Yes.
What about bringing people to Brussels, our relation of people there and people from afar?
Getting people of African descent to Brussels is a priority. There isn't financial support for that, but if IPB could send people of African descent to Brussels, hooray. I know that, because otherwise Brussels will be heavily European delegation.
Well, George, if I could add to that.
Go ahead.
I reached out to Marie-Claire Ferré, who is well known in the reparations movement, and she's based in the UK. I do know that at the International Secretariat of WILF in Geneva, I think there are at least 2 people of African descent, one person from Kenya and the other person perhaps from the DRC. So I think that WILF as a kind of anchor for this, given the many women around the world who are peace women in WILF. And on the question of men being included, all of the working groups are open to including at least one man. But if we have 5 speakers and 3 of them are women and 2 of them are men, we can decide among us, African women, if that would be okay. I'd say it would be okay, given that Ernest and Yanaka is here, and Yanaka is in the US base, but he travels extensively through Africa. What's your home country, Yanaka?
I'm from Ivory Coast. And
Okay.
yes, I'm from Ivory Coast.
Oh, okay, good. And so that's an answer to two of Francisca's questions about the men. So the U.S. section is going to have a very famous speaker, Joseph Gerson, has been invited to speak. And so he's world famous, and he would be speaking for the US-Canada panel, which would be 5 speakers with 10 minutes each. And on the process, we're looking at 90 minutes for the webinar with possibly 50 minutes of speakers speaking 10 minutes each. So if people who are asked to speak could think in terms of having 10 minutes, that would be great, because there will be Q&A, and I think the Q&A will be moderated as a hybrid with people in Brussels, if there is an African moderator in Brussels. And then George has agreed to do the primary kind of moderation for the hybrid, since she's an expert on Zoom. So I'll stop talking so much. Sean, if you could say what your thoughts are for how we would go forward. It's so exciting that we have the International Peace Bureau, and you have so many sections around the world, and Northern Africa is important if you can have someone from Northern Africa. Thank you.
Absolutely, and thank you so much for putting this event together. I think it's incredibly important that we really draw the attention as well to Africa, the work of NATO, the US, and others in Africa, and how it's preventing really peace. So I think in cooperation with Ernest, we would also, of course, share everything from the meeting today, if it's okay with our African network. And we could also certainly commit maybe 1 or 2 more people to join the panel, depending on where speakers are needed. And of course, including women. I know we have one close member who's a council member of IPB as well, also from Ghana, whose name is Baroness, and she has a Schengen visa, so she would very likely be able to join in person in Brussels. We can also look into it with Ernest here to see if we might be able to secure a visa for him. It's a difficult process even for us, unfortunately, but we can look into those possibilities. To have the representation in person in Brussels, we find very important. We do have a very small amount of funding dedicated to the Brussels event, so I will be speaking as well with our team of how we can best use that. Also, through the network, we have contacts to an activist who is here in Europe from Sudan, who has been working on the Sudanese conflict and the outbreak of violence in the recent months in Sudan. So perhaps we can also see if it might be possible for this person to attend in person and bring in that Northern African Sudanese perspective, which I find, I think, quite important as well when we talk about this event. We also have very dedicated members from Cameroon, from Rwanda, from Nigeria. Nigeria, we could talk, for example, about elections, election violence, and also the difficult economic situation that many are facing within the country that often leads to violence. Likewise, also in Liberia, quite a similar situation. When it comes to election violence and peace, these topics could certainly be brought in by some of our speakers from the network. So perhaps as a follow-up, I could suggest we hold a meeting quite soon with our African network core coordination team to discuss who would be available and interested in speaking, what the best topics for them to speak on, what they find the best topics would be, and then follow up shortly afterwards with an email to this group so that we can make decisions on that.
Excellent. Thanks so much, Sean. And of the speakers you suggest at this point, do look for a female speaker so that our majority speakers are female. And so we're good there. I don't think we're at a point now where we can talk about the order of the speakers. That would have to wait for our next meeting or our speakers meeting, because we'd have to talk about, who's going to are we going to go from big to small and have somebody like Naka who can talk about the whole continent be their first speaker, and then other people's follow, and their presentations are more direct to where they are specifically on the continent and what their work has been to challenge AFRICOM and NATO and connect to the UN decade. So order we're not going to cover today, but let's talk a little bit about process. We will try to get the Friday, July 7th, 9 a.m. slot for our webinar. The other slot that so far has been tentatively put into the program by ULA, the primary organizer, is a late, an odd time, an inconvenient time for us to talk. So we're going to push for that time slot. And as Teresa said, 10 minutes a speaker. If we have 5 speakers, then a Q&A process for a 90-minute total webinar. We also will request that our speakers send a brief bio to me as moderator that I will share on the screen before they talk. Look, like in the first 30 seconds of them speaking, people will see their bio on the screen. So sending that bio in would be important. And all the other details about our process we can cover in our next meeting or our speakers meeting. So I'm recommending that when we decide who all the speakers are, I'm looking at you, Sean, somehow, that we then propose that they meet together a week or so before the event to share with each other what they're going to say in their 10 minutes, what they're going to say in 10 minutes plus at the end of their 10 minutes. So 8 minutes of content when you speak and 2 minutes or 90 seconds of, and this is what we want you to do. And this is what we're hoping people do. And this is what we're organizing people to do, so that we can hear action steps in that, which is important. And overall, we may, in our next meeting or speakers meeting, come up with actions that we want to recommend as a whole, you know, to anyone who's listening or attending this webinar. So one of the things we also need to decide in terms of process is if indeed IPV can send people of African descent to Brussels, who of that person of African descent, this is additional to the one speaker who hopefully is a woman, who that person of African descent, hopefully ideally is a woman, could co-host the webinar and co-moderate with myself on the ground, and it will become a hybrid event. We don't have enough information for that today, but I want to put out that we want to decide. Any other thoughts about process and action steps?
Well, George, I think it's important that we are real clear, no more than 5 speakers. And if we can lean on the International Peace Bureau for a speaker from Northern Africa, a woman, that would be great. And so, George, you and I really do need to get up with Jenny, the membership director for WILF, based in Switzerland, who has agreed to kind of assist with the Africa sections, and the fact that the international president of WILF from Cameroon is being leaned on as a speaker, in addition to Edgewood. So that's something we need to do because we really do want WILF, the Women's International League for Peace and Freedom, to play a significant role in this global peace women activity. And that is the struggle, I think, that we're having a little bit because the networks being unstable in Africa. And I see we completely lost Edward. And so hopefully we can communicate a little bit more on email before we decide on when we're gonna meet again. But I think on the timeline, George, We really do have to have everything finalized by the next meeting of the Global Women. So June 1st is the next meeting of Global Women. And as has been the practice, meeting every 2 weeks. So then the next meeting would probably be around the 15th of June, which would be the final. We have everything together. But the other important action step or activity is to get as many signers on the declaration as possible. And I understand the International Peace Bureau and World Beyond War are working to coordinate that we have a huge number. I see that the number of signers from the US is really growing rapidly, but we need to have the signers. And I love the way it's organized country by country. So if we can get 100 countries, for instance, with signers, that would be fantastic, because the media aspect of this has to be promoted. And we want to make sure that CNN does not white us out, if you hear me. So we don't want CNN to white us out or any of the other international media folks. We want it to be known that we had a presence in Brussels. So those are some of the things that we can all kind of figure out. I think there is a media working group. So George, maybe if you could say something about that.
I just know there is a media working group. I don't know. Gloria McMillan from WILF is on that. And I don't know their plans, but to get it out on social media and press releases and all of that stuff. And we will hear more about them on what they're doing on June 1st. And yes, we want as much determined by that meeting as possible. And then, as you said, Teresa, make sure we got the final by the 15th of June. And here's someone who, it says Rashid. I don't know who this is, but maybe it's Edwick coming back. Maybe it's someone else. Welcome.
Rashid is actually a member of the African network of the IPB. So.
Okay. Well, welcome, Rashid. We're getting down to the last 14, 16 minutes of our meeting. And so I want to hear from any of y'all who've been on the call, your thoughts, things that we need to make sure we do before we get together again. Any assignments. We know that those of y'all who are speaking are going to think about your 10 minutes and make sure 30 seconds to 2 minutes of that is action steps. We're going to think about and figure out the order of speakers next time and our promotion of the webinar. We'll be able to add ideally a woman who's from North Africa, ideally a woman who will be on the ground in Brussels who can co-moderate. And I can't think of any other pieces that we don't yet have named or identified. But any other thoughts?
George, could we hear from Rashid so we know exactly who he is? So if he could introduce himself and say where he is and how he happened to be here today.
All right. Hi guys. Sorry, I'm not putting on my video because the internet is kind of unstable here, and unfortunately, I got the email for the meeting late, and it was also the same time as my time for going to the mosque. So I just came out of the mosque right now. So yeah, my name is Rashid Yusuf. I'm from Nigeria. I am the founder of RA Foundation, and I'm part of the African Working Group Steering Committee for IPB. I currently stay in Nigeria, and yeah, I'm international consultant, international development consultant, and I also work in the space of public health. So, yeah, so that's a brief about me, and I'm looking forward to meeting some of you that I'm just meeting for the first time later on. So, yeah, thank you for having me.
Well, thank you, Rashid.
Wow, I can imagine that through the International Peace Bureau, y'all can make sure we've got a lot of attendance to our webinar who are from the continent. So that's exciting. All right. Any other comments from folks before we try to think about our next meeting? Anything you think we need to hear that you haven't said or we haven't covered?
I think, George, in our usual fashion of doing these type webinars, I just wanted to be clear that the speakers meeting will include the speakers and everyone participating in the working group. So we would want Sean, Francisca, myself, and others who are not speaking to also be at the speakers meeting. So that would be in late June or early July, as close to the date as possible without being uncomfortable, so that we know exactly what's going to happen. And I envision us having at least one other meeting after the meeting on June 15th, when the final is decided. We know exactly what our slot is, and we know everything. And that meeting should also be what is the turnout, because what we've agreed to do in the U.S. section of WIL, which has approximately 1,500 members, we will get the U.S. president, George, since you're on the national board, to make sure she signs on, and that the U.S. section of WIL will mobilize all its members and branches to participate in the Global Peace Women events as best we can. So I think that's pretty much what I'm thinking about, is a mobilization. How can we make sure that we have as many peace activists from around the U.S. As possible in that? And I would urge people in every other country and region to also work for that highest level of mass participation.
Mm-hmm.
Thank you.
Thank you. Any other thoughts, anyone?
Yes, I would also, I requested that if anyone have the link to the conference, the upcoming conference in Ghana, they can share with me so I can also get through it and pick some information about us.
Okay.
Yanaka?
Let me see. Yes, just wanted to say that I don't think there is a link yet. I met a personality in Ghana, and I think she's a diplomat. She was at the conference, and she's the one who shared the information with me. And but the only thing I know, I'm supposed to communicate. I'm yet to communicate with her so that she can give me more details. But I was very happy, to know that they want to do something on reparation. So she told me that the event could be in the month of October. So then, so of course, we can exchange numbers, and then I don't know if you have Teresa's contact or George, but they can give you my contact information, and then when I have something new, I will share that with you.
Thanks for giving me your email address.
If you don't
and
mind,
I can make sure an email.
If you don't mind. So, for instance, the event on Togo, the event on Togo is things are happening. So if you go online, if you put Lomé Pan-African Congress, you will see so many press releases about the events, and that is Togo's initiative. And then that Pan-African Congress, they want to do that next year, end of 2024. But what we did in May on 22nd, it was just the launching ceremony. And so, so this is what I wanted to tell you.
Thank you.
Number, Ernest, the number that you put in, is that like a WhatsApp thing?
Yes, that's my WhatsApp number.
Okay.
All right. So now let's look at dates for the next time we get together. If this day of the week is good and this time is okay, So Ernest,
Well, George, Rashid mentioned Juma and going to the Friday prayer service. So I'm not sure about him being able to come back at this exact time. So I don't know what time it is in Nigeria. I can't keep up with all these different times, but you know, I'm available to meet a little bit later. So if we changed it to an hour later, for instance, would that make sure that we're not interfering with Juma prayer services on a Friday for those who are Muslims?
what say
Maybe
you?
Rashid can speak to that. What would be a good time for him, since he said he was late coming because of Juma?
Well, since it's just me, I think the 2 o'clock is still fine. You can go ahead with the timing, and I'll see if I can join me maybe an earlier service somewhere else, and then see if I can make it in time for this same time. So I'll work on that. I think you can leave the time like that. It's fine. I will just find an alternative and then see how I can still join in early enough.
Yes. Well, I certainly wouldn't mind meeting an hour later. So let us know, what time is it for you, Ernest or Rashid?
Yeah. It's the same time in Ghana and Nigeria?
No, Nigeria is 1 hour ahead of Ghana.
So what time? So you're at what time, Ernest? Right
It's
now?
1 o'clock in Ghana and 2 o'clock in Nigeria.
So if we met an hour later, you'd be meeting at
12 o'clock.
12 o'clock in Ghana and 1 o'clock in Nigeria, an hour later?
Sure, that's correct.
So if we met at 10 a.m. for the Eastern US, it'll be noon in Ghana and 1 in Nigeria, yes?
Yes.
Is that all right with y'all?
No. Ernest is making a mistake.
It's an hour later.
No, right now, let's say when there are 4 hour difference between the east coast of the United States and then Ghana. Right now it's 4 hours difference.
So 10 a.m. for me is
so when it's 10 a.m. here, it's going to be 2 p.m. in Ghana.
yes. Okay. 10 a.m. is 2 p.m. That doesn't feel too bad for me.
I thought you mentioned an hour before.
No. We're not going to go earlier. Good Lord. No way. It was enough to be here at 9 a.m., but 10 a.m. is much more doable for me. So if our next meeting could be at 10 a.m., that would be great. Is this day of the week okay?
Yeah,
that's fine.
Works for me.
All right. So how about, let me look on the calendar. I'm thinking about
2 weeks from today.
Are you looking at your calendar? That's what I'm thinking of. But I got
No, I'm not yet. I think since
I think it's the 9th of June. Is that right?
what day would it be? The 9th?
Yes, I think it's the
Yes,
9th of
June
June.
9.
June 9th is 2 weeks. Okay?
Yeah, that works for me. I'm totally open. Thank you.
All right, then. So we'll meet. I'll send out the Zoom for 10 Eastern on the 9th, and we will be able to get a little closer on the specifics of the webinar.
Yep.
Great. Thanks so much, everyone.
Sean says, unfortunately, he will not be available in 2 weeks.
Oh.
Yeah.
Oh.
Yeah, unfortunately, that weekend we have a summit that we're doing all weekend. So even, the week beforehand will be quite difficult. June for me is unfortunately quite a complicated month overall. But what I can say is, we can have the conversations in our African network. And certainly Ernest, Rashid, and maybe some others can come, and we will, of course, have discussed everything beforehand. So I think they're more than capable of doing the follow-up without me. And then afterwards, of course, I'll meet with them again to make sure that we have all the information and can take the necessary follow-up steps.
You'll have
Just
this
to
recording by
clarify,
the end of today.
Sean, just to clarify, you're saying that Ernest and Rashid do not have the same schedule conflict as you, because
Exactly.
we would really need them at the meeting on the 9th if we do a meeting on the 9th.
Yeah, as far as I'm aware, Ernest and Rashid, you can correct me, but I think you're both available on that day.
Yes, I am.
And the person that you will recommend from Northern Africa, she will be available. And the person y'all will recommend who might be on the ground in Brussels, she will be available. Yes?
Hopefully. We'll have to check with them to see the
Yes.
schedule, but we have the time written down, and if there are further scheduling conflicts, then we will write to you and let you know and see if we can organize a call at a time that works for them as well.
Thank you so much. And if this recording is helpful, I'll make sure I've sent it out as soon as it's processed and done, which will probably be at the end of my day.
That would be lovely. Thank you.
Great. Any other thoughts or questions before we leave? We have 2 minutes.
I would just quickly add that I'll put my email in the chats. I wasn't in the communications for this meeting here. Francisca had sent it to me. I think we've been in other meetings together before.
Yes,
so you might be able to find my email, but just to make it easier, I'll have it in the chat here too, so you can easily find it.
Thanks, Sean. That's great. All right, everyone. I hope this has been helpful, and it's been great to see you and generate this good energy for the webinar. And I'll see you in a couple of weeks.
Okay, thank you so much. Thanks, Teresa.
Thank you.
Thanks, George.
Thank you,
Thank everyone.
George, for organizing.
Thank
Bye.
you. Bye.
Thank you.